Good morning and welcome to another edition of Capital Preview. I'm Bill Peard. Capital Preview is a show brought to you by Mediacom that discusses the issues important to Iowa and our Iowa legislators. We have with us this morning Tom Sands from District 88, who's chair of Ways and Means. Thanks, Tom, for coming in this morning.
Good morning, Bill.
I appreciate it. So we're going to get right into it. This legislature session seems like it's going to be a short one, or hopefully that's going to be a short one, but it's going to be a mighty one because there's some pretty key issues that are going to be discussed and decided on this year. So the first one is the coupling bill, and I think that's kind of a good one for you to launch into and kind of tell us a little bit about that.
It is. It's what we refer to as just exactly what you call it, is a coupling bill, and people that's not used to the process will look at you like, what in the world is a coupling bill? But every year, one of the first things that the legislature needs to decide is on tax code is how or if we will couple with the new changes that the federal tax or the federal Congress passed on their tax code, which they did once again this December, and so it just gives us a few weeks to prepare. But I have assigned that bill last week in committee. It is on the calendar to debate in committee at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and my intentions are to kick that bill out and move it to the House for full debate later in the week, because we have lots of Iowans that are filing taxes, and the preparers are preparing those returns, and they need to know what Iowa is. And some of the changes the federal government made on tax code is for tax year 15, which is the year that everyone is filing for right now, is on businesses. They've once again allowed the 179 expensing, and that's taking some depreciable assets and permitting small businesses that qualify to be able to straight line expense them off in this tax year, which is a big deal. Most businesses have been planning on that because that is what we have done the past few years, but we have to make that decision. So the bill that we will be kicking out of the Ways and Means Committee later today will do just that. It couples with the federal tax code, including the 179 expensing. However, we do exclude the bonus depreciation part, but that's designed mainly for big business, and it's something that we have not been coupling with the last few years. So this bill will represent consistency and urgency, and that's what taxpayers expect.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of a relief. So the next thing I'd kind of like to talk to you about is the governor's proposal of taking the 1% sales tax from school funding to pay for our water quality issues that we are facing in our state. So would you like to kind of delve in on that one?
I would. And I think it was in the month of November, the governor reached out, and it might even been October, that he was working on this concept in tax law and wanted to bring me up to date on what he was thinking. So I've been in a dialogue with either the governor or his staff since fall on this particular issue for sure. And back in 2008, the Iowa legislature made the decision that the local option sales tax, we had two of them. Iowa state sales and use tax was 5%, and then there was a lost tax acronym for cities and counties, 1%, or could go up to 1%, and then there was another local option tax designed primarily for schools called SILO that was allowed to go up to 1%. So there were many of Iowa's counties and cities were up to a 7%, not all. Mm-hmm. So in 2008, the legislature made the conscious decision that they would repeal the SILO, the school local option sales tax, and make Iowa's sales tax and use tax 6% and versus 5%, and then give 1/6 of that 6% back to the schools. Mm-hmm. So what they really did was just change the mechanics of it and took it from being a local option, local decision, to a state decision and then would divide that money up on an equal per pupil basis and then send it back to the local school districts. It was a very divisive issue. It cut lots of different ways. It was not just Republican, Democrat. It was urban versus rural, conservative versus progressive, a lot of different divisions on that bill because I was here in 2008 and was in the minority at that time, so I was the ranking member. And I was a no on making that statewide for a variety of reasons. But three of the primary ones was it took the local control, the local responsibility out of it, number one. Number two, while there was some property tax relief as an option, there wasn't a set amount to go to property tax relief. So I believe that the property taxpayer wasn't really a winner in that decision. And number three, not enough oversight on what the money could be used for. It's the primary law was for infrastructure or property tax relief, and then the Iowa legislature, Iowa code defined what infrastructure was, okay? So the bill maybe was debated over a couple-year period, but was passed in 2008. I was on the losing side. That happens in this business. And one of the things that the legislature said was, well, we will sunset this law in 2029. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what's bringing it to a head a little bit. Even though that's several years away, most schools that were using that pot of money for infrastructure would do a 20-year bond, so they no longer obviously can do that 20-year bond. So they've been pushing for the sunset to be extended. And at the same time, now we've got this growing need in the state of Iowa to find additional dollars to fund water quality and water quality measures. So I think that's where Governor Branstad was looking at, is trying to find, well, maybe we can extend it, give the schools something they want, but at the same time, some of that growth in revenue above what the schools are getting now, we could divert off to water quality and help solve that problem as well. And so that's kind of the history of where we came from, how we got to where we are today, and now the governor's proposal going forward. The governor's a good friend of mine. We will continue to visit. However, I don't, and I've told him this, really support his idea in diverting some of those new dollars of sales tax that was supposed to go to schools to water quality. So I will be releasing a bill probably later this week, if not next week, to kind of go back and address what I believe is wrong with Iowa code to begin with, if we are actually going to extend that sunset. Mm-hmm. So my bill will say we'll extend the sunset till 2046. That'll give school districts a 10-year window to float a 20-year bond. It will cap the amount of money per pupil that school districts are getting now at today's rate, and we will take those additional growth in dollars that could happen with this increase in sales tax and divert that right back to direct property tax relief on the school side. So any levy they have raised outside the general fund on property taxes, it would buy those rates down. So the property taxpayer finally gets to see the win they were promised back in 2008. And then lastly is, right now schools have to pass a revenue purpose statement on what their idea or what their purpose of that sales tax is. And I believe there should be more local input and responsibility on the building of infrastructure. So I think they should take it right back to the voters, and the voters of that school district need to decide with a supermajority whether they believe that project is a worthy project and should go forward. If it's $1 million, greater than $1 million project, or if it's less than $1 million project and which would be more repairs, then the school board can make that decision.
It's complicated. but it's got a lot of teeth in it too. So
It's extremely complicated,
Yeah.
but in my opinion, that corrects the flaw
Absolutely.
in the original bill
Yeah.
and still goes forward to 2046
Yep.
to build some school infrastructure. Some people back home have said, well, our school district has replaced every building. Well, that may be true with some school districts, but not every school district has. So there is
It's a big
still a
state.
need for infrastructure updating out there.
absolutely, yeah, that sounds good. Tom, you know, there is an issue coming, or there is a economic development tool called TIF. I think a lot of people talk about it. I'm not sure how many people truly understand it. So, could you give us kind of a simplistic overview of what TIF is and how it can be used in cities?
I will tackle that task. Whether I accomplish it is yet to be seen.
Yeah, well.
Because there is nothing simple about tax code,
Right.
and certainly not about tax
Right.
increment financing. But in kind of a real, hopefully simplistic form, once a TIF district is set up, and it's really by Iowa code an urban renewal area, but we all know it as a TIF district inside that area, is you basically cap the property tax amount that is being received at the very beginning of the establishment of the TIF district, and then the growth in property tax dollars from that base is called the increment, and that increment then is diverted. So if a city is established in the TIF district where schools, cities, counties, community colleges, there's a whole list of people that get property tax dollars and would still get those dollars in the base amount, but in the increment amount, all that growth in property taxes goes to, in this particular instance, the city that is established the TIF district. And that is by Iowa code, and that has been allowed basically for urban renewal, right? Originally it was for slum and blighted areas, which makes perfect sense. That has grown into other type of economic development areas as well as residential. And so over the years, this has grown into some TIF districts go on into perpetuity, some end in 20 years or less, and some residential TIFs might even end in 15 years or less. So you've got, this has grown where there's a lot of different TIF districts with a lot of different areas, and with that growth of TIF districts as well as dollar amounts, now the state is finding itself spending over $50 million of taxpayer money to backfill local school districts in their funding just because of the loss of revenue.
Sure.
So what my bill will be looking to address is to continue to let cities and counties and what's are usually the two primary, cities more than counties, but counties are starting to use them more, is if you got a slum and blighted area or an area that's needing urban renewal and built up, and the city can set a TIF district and maybe put in some infrastructure like streets, water, sewer, the basic needs to help that development area, they would be allowed to do so, but there should be a end time to all TIF districts where it's for a set amount of time.
Yeah.
Everybody grows, but not everybody gets to win until that increment is released back to the other property tax receivers. So we'll be looking at a bill to address that again that I think protects the integrity of the original use of TIF.
Got it. Thank you. The other thing, and this is the big one, and you being the tax man, is the budget. I mean, the general spending. Obviously, the Iowa has a state constitutional provision that you have to have a balanced budget every year. So, so here we are with trying to balance the budget this year, and
here we are in week number 3, and we're off and running. And of course, it's the budget that and the difference of opinion on the different legislators and the two different chambers and the executive branch that has kept us here till June the last few years. But I think all legislators, including most Iowans, are saying, okay, guys and gals, let's end this legislative session on time, and there's a real big push, a bill this year to do that. And I hope we can certainly accomplish that. One of the big issues, again, will be school funding and statewide, what everyone used to call allowable growth. But in other words, the state in the foundation formula establishes a per pupil amount that allows school districts to spend. And then some of that is made up with property taxes, and some of it is with state taxpayer money. And the governor has proposed we've increased that amount 2.45%. Last year, the House passed a bill to increase the school funding in 2017 for 2%, and the Senate's at 4%. So we're not a long ways off in percentage ways that we can work this out, but it gets to be some big dollars, because 2% is $80 million. 2.45 is a little over 100, and 4% is about 160 million, and there's only $153 million of new money to spend.
Right.
So if you give
Yep.
somebody more, somebody's got to get less,
Yep.
and that's where the discussion is right now.
Just like our checkbook, right?
Just like our checkbook.
Right. Well, I appreciate it. We've tackled some pretty complex issues, but you've done it great, and I appreciate your work up at the legislature. So thank you again for joining us on another edition of Capitol Preview. Our guest today has been Representative Tom Sands, who's chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Thank you.